Hey, what's good? You know how American leadership these days is going out and seems like trying to pick fights and trying to throw their weight around a little bit? What would happen if maybe we pushed a little too far and everyone said, screw it, it's on? Well, let's take a look, because on the Military Show channel, they have a video called The United States versus the World, Who Would Win? Scary stuff, but as long as we're on the winning end of this argument, I'm not trying to get into no fights. I'm just kidding. Let's figure it out, y'all. I'm going to keep working on some warm-up sketches. Before we get into it, remember to go to coconutjustice.com to get some clothes that I think would look good on you. Let's go. I think it's going to be a good day when we all realize that we are on this planet together and we got to figure it out. We can't let the wrong people tell us the wrong information. But I guess this video is going to show us, just in case we do make silly decisions and just in case we do pick a fight with the rest of the world, what could possibly happen. Let's take a look.
Superpower can be defined as a state with the ability to project power or exert influence on a global scale, usually in more than one region at a time. The United States has been the world's sole superpower since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, holding an unrivaled degree of
Hey, check this out. When they did fall and, Germany had to tear down the wall, I was there for that. Yeah. People were like, what was that like? I was like, It was cool. Like, people from East Germany were hella nice and they're super nice and all that stuff. Their cars were trash. You can tell the difference in technology, automobile technology specifically, when that wall came down, and it was wild.
And military dominance around the globe. Even today, with the rise of China, the US still remains by far the most powerful country, still far outstripping competitors in national power. It still has 3 times China's wealth and 5 times its military capabilities. And that's not to mention its enormous advantages in geography, demographics, and more. All things considered, it doesn't seem likely that the US is losing its status as global hegemon anytime soon. But hypothetically, what would happen if America found itself in a conflict against the entire rest of the world? Would the country still have the power to achieve victory, or would it be worn down and
Hey, and what I want you guys to pay attention is all these people that are out here talking big. It's our poor young people that are going out there fighting these fights. You got to pay attention. You got to pay attention to who's talking shit, whose mouth is going to write a check that your ass may or may not be able to cash. You got to pay attention to that stuff.
Today, we'll take a closer look at these questions with a USA versus the world wargame. First, it goes without saying that such a scenario is extremely unlikely, if not downright impossible, during our lifetimes. Because of its diplomatic and economic ties around the world, as well as its huge arsenal of nuclear weapons, the US has almost entirely removed the possibility of real war with Europe and many other countries. But playing out the remote possibility still shows us a lot about US power.
This was last year. I wonder if they would have had more information about kind of like what we're doing now. I wonder if that would change the message of this video, because we got this dude. He's getting people nervous. Yeah, like, it'd be interesting to see if all these guys that talk all this mess, if they had to send their kids in there, if they, you know what I mean? If they're the ones that had to do the sacrificing, not just poor kids that are looking for a better way and a better life,
Possibility still shows us a lot about US power and how it might look in the coming years. For the purpose of this video, we'll exclude nuclear weapons and assume that such a conflict would break out after a period of heightened global tensions rather than as a surprise attack. So who would really matter? The biggest challenges to the US in terms of actual military capability would certainly be China. Western European nations would be a close second, as they are wealthy and have stockpiles of advanced weapons and technology. While Russia, once considered to be America's main military challenger, its invasion of Ukraine has made clear that the country is something of a paper tiger, especially if its nuclear stockpile is out of the equation. India is another potential player, with the world's largest population and substantial military hardware. Together, China, Russia, India, and Europe account for the majority of the world's military spending outside of the US. In our hypothetical, let's say these countries all align against the US, with the rest of the world primarily contributing materiel or financial support. While this is extremely simplified,
like that?
the fact of the matter is that most countries do not have the resources to project power beyond their borders or immediate region, making an attack on the US impossible. So let's say war breaks out. The first major difficulty with a global offensive against the US would be geographic. Surrounded by water on two sides, and Mexico and Canada to the north and south, any physical attack against the US would face major challenges. First, it would mean mounting either an enormous amphibious assault from one of the coasts or attempting to invade via land. But the deserts in the southwest and the Great Lakes in the Midwest insulate the country's major population centers from a potential invasion staged from Canada and Mexico. An invasion from outside North America would require massive fronts and long supply.
And to be honest, that's a good reason why we have to zip up the southern border. Not just drugs, not just Mexicans, not just South Americans, not just that. This is a very good reason. Just build it up, you know? That's how we've been doing it throughout history. You got to protect yourself, you know, walls of Jericho, Great Wall of China. This is not new.
Across the Pacific or Atlantic Oceans, leading to a dramatic reduction of overall power projection. Military expert Dylan Lurk has noted that even the largest amphibious assault in history on either the west coast or the east coast would be too insignificant to acquire an effective beachhead. If every foreign power managed to coordinate such a massive operation and do so while remaining undetected under the enormous reach and power of the American intelligence apparatus, it would still have issues building up a force of any significant size before being pushed back into the sea. In addition, the strategic Hawaiian island chain acts as a gateway to the US mainland for attacks from the Pacific and is protected by a significant military presence.
There's a couple books that talk about how Hawaii was pressured into joining the Americas, or not the Americas, United States of America. Yeah, it's an interesting corner someone was painted in, but for us, it makes a lot of sense because, again, you know, you have to move things to protect yourself. You have to move equipment. You have to have equipment readily available. And that's why, you know, some of my videos, people talk about how we don't need NATO and stuff like that. And that's just not the case. Something as simple as moving equipment somewhere that you need it, the efficiency of that process ends up being so very important. That's why we need to keep these relationships healthy. Don't let these folks be out here trying to convince you that we don't need friends, that we got this and all that stuff. No. If Europe decided to be like, yeah, no, you got to get all your stuff out of here, all of it, and then something happens, and let's say that Russia takes over Ukraine, and then they take over Poland, and then they want to move into Germany, and then they want to move into France, and then they want to move into Italy. Now we're over here with our pants down because all of our friends just now got taken over. I'm not saying we need to bend over and show them what we got under our skirt. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying we need to play nice with the folks that help us maintain peace.
Military installations in Alaska provide protection against any invasion from along the Arctic or Northwest. An attack from Mexico would probably be more feasible due to the Great Lakes blocking much of the Canadian border. But California and Texas have the largest concentration of defense industries and military bases in the country, thus providing an effective deterrent from any.
Yet again, California steps up. Yet again, all that mess that you guys like to say about California. But look at California, bro. California be stepping up every time. You know that California passed a law that we're going to make our own insulin just so we don't have people that need insulin that have to pay however much it is. I don't even know. I don't even know. But the point remains, like, if you, California be stepping up. That's all I'm gonna say. California be stepping up, and people be talking shit, and it's just y'all need to get it straight.
With the southwestern desert spanning the two regions, the Southwest is also home to multiple heavily armed military bases, such as the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico or NORAD headquarters in Colorado. An attack launched from Canada on the Midwest or the West would be limited to light infantry and would likely fail to take over population centers or other important strategic points, since there is mostly rural.
You better watch the news. Chicago ain't gonna take a laying down. You're not just gonna stroll in here and take it. I want to see. It would be fun to see something about how Canada tries to invade us, and then what happens in Chicago, and then like after Chicago steps up and fights off a bunch of people. I want to see people in the red states talk that shit.
Homeland and unpopulated national parks along the border, along with air bases located hundreds of miles south. Dr. Beckley makes this point as well, stating that the United States is a natural economic hub and military fortress. It's packed with resources and has more economic arteries like navigable waterways and ports than the rest of the world combined. And even if the US military was unable to stop an invasion, the huge diversity of terrain would also provide US military personnel or militias with the ability to conduct guerrilla warfare. The US is also by far the most heavily armed civilian population in the world, with a staggering 120 guns for every 100 people. This means that even if a coalition of other countries was able to actually get troops into the US, it would end up facing an incredibly well-armed and pissed-off insurgency. On the other hand, over the past 80 years, the US...
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. If someone comes to knock down our door, if someone comes and picks a fight with us, does my skin color, is that gonna keep some of you guys from doing your job, being side by side with me, fighting off these knuckles? Yeah, just think about that when you see people like me in the streets. When all hell breaks loose, skin color is actually gonna keep you from doing your job.
Worldwide infrastructure of military bases, supply lines, and the world's largest air and naval transport fleets. This contains hundreds of ships and aircraft, more than the entire fleet of most countries. The lack of global mobility would be an enormous issue for any coalition facing the US.
So for real, this is the reason why we need a strong military. We have to defend ourselves, and we have to continue to communicate and sharpen the ideas and further the idea that we're in this together, all of us. So we have to have the freedom to exchange ideas and the freedom to voice those ideas, so we can, like they said, form a more perfect union. They didn't say we nailed it. They said we need to continue to communicate and educate ourselves, and make smart decisions. But we also need a strong military to keep people like the communists, China, Russia. We need to keep people like that, like the Putins, Xi Jinping's, the knucklehead in North Korea, all those guys that want to come and tell you to stop communicating, to stop sharing ideas and to stop developing ideas and how to do things better, we have to get away from that. We have to get away from people who are telling you, I got this, I got this. No, bitch, you don't got this. You don't got this. I don't care who you're talking about. You don't got this, because we still have homeless people. We still have hungry kids. We still have a lot of uneducated people that people are bragging about, that they trick you into stuff. Those are the people that we can't continue to put in positions of leadership. The government is supposed to be like referees on a basketball team. Everyone is playing the game, but you need someone who says, no, 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 that's a foul, that's against the rules, la da da. Right? Basically, stay out of my way. I'm going to go and I'm going to create a company, and I'm going to try to make my money, and I'm going to try to feed my kids, and I'm going to try to do all that stuff. But we need someone that'll blow a whistle when someone is trying to take advantage of you. That's why they have portions of the government that protect you from, going back to the analogy, from a foul. Is it a foul? Did the ball go out of bounds? All those things, that's what government is for. Government tries to maintain a level of equality so everyone has the same opportunities to go out there and make things happen, right? It's not more difficult than that. If you think about it as a basketball game, that's basically how it goes. Lately, some of the referees have gotten paid off, and they're doing things for favors and all that stuff, all that corporate stuff, all that corporate mentality. That's why you cannot run the U.S. government like a corporation. Because there are people that will take advantage, and then other people that are going to be kissing that person's ass because they want to get in good, and they want to get the pay raises, and they want to have all the positions and all that stuff. I've been there. I've done that. This shit doesn't work. You can't have a financial outcome for the benefit of the people. That comes later. But all that to say, we need a military to enable us to talk out ideas, because otherwise someone will come and tell you that you don't need to do that they have all the answers, and they do not. They don't.
Weeks before the sort of global conflict in our hypothetical, the US would most likely pull its forces out of the most vulnerable, non-American bases in Europe, Asia, and the Pacific, concentrating its resources in places where the US exercises greater territorial control to act as staging areas. Some areas would be considered too important to abandon, especially those supporting the military's supply chain, US oil assets, and key territorial choke points. One of the first battlefields in any conflict between the US and the rest of the world would be the Middle East. Here, one major aim of the DoD, as carried out by US Central Command, would be to secure critical US oil refineries and distribution.
Pay attention to how they're not saying we're going to start fighting over here for equal rights. They're not saying we're going to fight in this land to set people free for democracy, all of that stuff. They don't say that.
As well as gain control of the sea lanes used for transporting oil out of the region. As of 2022, 80.4% of the world's oil reserves are located in countries belonging to the international oil cartel OPEC, and 67.1% of OPEC reserves are in the Middle East. Similarly, over 60% of the world's oil passes through shipping lanes in the Arabian Sea alone. While the US has reduced its presence in the region in recent years, a global conflict would almost certainly cause a reorientation. Possessing the world's 12th largest oil reserves means that the US could theoretically go self-sufficient in wartime, but control of some Middle Eastern reserves would make guaranteeing its supply much easier. Similarly, it would allow the US to deny oil to much of the rest of the world, and undermine the coalition's economies and military production. Europe, which would represent the US's most significant adversary, receives a significant amount of its crude oil and natural gas from the Middle East. This means that US military control of the region would harm Europe's ability to sustain a war effort for any extended period of time. China would face a similar issue, as over half of all its oil comes from the Middle East, making the region among one of the most likely fronts in a global war with the US. At the start of the conflict, the US would first strike at oil-related facilities across the Middle East, using carrier-based strike aircraft plus medium and long-range ballistic missiles. US power projection means that even without bases in Afghanistan,
This is what they mean when people say we need to be energy independent. It doesn't necessarily have to be drill, baby, drill and get as much oil. We don't need to be doing that. If we can find alternate ways, we break the chain. We break the addiction to oil. It's not just the environment. It's also politically smart to have alternate means of energy. That's why you do a combination: oil, gas, electric. This is why. Wind, water, whatever else. There's a building in China that they're actually using gravity to make electricity. You know, there's ways around it. We don't have to cut it all the way out, but damn, we have to. There's more important things than just the environment. Why we need to break our addiction to oil.
could easily hit targets anywhere from the Mediterranean to the Strait of Hormuz. While regional powers could offer some resistance, none of them have anywhere close to the manpower or firepower needed to stop the US in an all-out war. While Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and several others do have modern fighter jets and other weaponry, even they would not last very long up against the might of the DoD. And because each is an independent country, intelligence and resource sharing among them would also be limited, further reducing the region's ability to stand up to the US in a shooting war. Most of their assets' signals would also likely be jammed by America's powerful electronic warfare capabilities, which would disrupt enemy communications, targeting, and guidance systems across the region. The greatest threat to US control.
I got my money on, if we were to pack up a bunch of our country boys, these dudes that are out there and they're just, guns are their favorite. We pack those kids up and send them out there and shut that shit down instantly.
The Middle East in our scenario comes from ground-based air defenses, as even older systems can shoot unsuspecting fighter jets from the sky. However, unlike Russia's recent experience in Ukraine, the US has actually proven that it can effectively destroy another nation's air defense network, as it did during Desert Storm in the 1990s. Today this might be even easier due to the enormous arsenal of drones the US has access to. Most US losses in the air would likely come from such drones, as well as fourth-generation jets like the F-15, while its more modern F-18s and F-22s could evade all but the best air defense systems. After establishing air superiority, the US would then work to control all choke points into and out of the region, especially the easily blocked Suez Canal, where over 12% of global trade passes through. If it was able to effectively keep regional control over the Middle East and its resources, the US would have a decent shot at winning against the rest of the world. A second major battlefield would be the Pacific, where the US would probably use its fleet to keep China and other East Asian nations contained and stop them from attacking the West Coast. This could mean either a blockade of major trade and supply routes, as well as using islands like Hawaii and Guam to stage its own offensives. It would also utilize its fleet of aircraft carriers heavily in the Asia-Pacific region.
You see what I mean? You see what I mean? You have to have equipment ready, because when someone gets out of pocket, you got to be ready. Put them back in the box. No, bitch. Get back in there. Get back in your room. Nothing to see here.
As of this video, there are 47 aircraft carriers around the world. The largest 11 of these are all nuclear-powered carriers belonging to the US, which have more than twice the combined total deck space of every other country combined. The Pacific Fleet fields 7 of these, and in a global war could use them to deny access to anything approaching the US mainland. Again, oil would be another top concern, and the US could use its massive navy to gain control of the Strait of Malacca. which carries up to 40% of the world's trade every year. While less easily choked off than the Suez Canal, a US blockade of this waterway would also devastate most economies in Asia, giving the US serious economic leverage over China, India, and others. The US would also likely exert its naval power in the South China Sea, which it could use to launch strikes against China, Japan, the Philippines, or any other regional power. Heavy fighting would ensue across the sea and air domains all around the South China Sea, and could account for the heaviest US casualties in any theater of this hypothetical war. Another potential target is Taiwan, where over 90% of the world's advanced microchips are currently fabricated. The US might even need to seize and try to occupy the island to stop the global coalition from...
Pay attention to this part too, because they're saying the same way Russia is trying to take back Ukraine. There's rumors out there that China wants Taiwan back, and that's why it's important. It was important for a few years ago. The government decided to invest in making computer chips and stuff. This is why Taiwan is making a lot of computer chips for the entire planet. And when China decides they want Taiwan back, it's going to make things wild.
Dominating the production of modern electronics. To do so, the US would inevitably have to challenge China as well. Chinese air defenses and ballistic missile capabilities are already powerful alone, and if combined with the assets of every other country in the region, could potentially pose a problem for the US. The naval base on Guam would be especially vulnerable to strikes by ballistic missiles, which could overwhelm its limited air defenses. Even so, the US Navy is so powerful that every country in the East Pacific combined would be occupied with fending it off, and probably could not launch their own strikes on the US mainland. And because the US Navy is larger than those of the next 8 countries combined, it could easily fight in 2 or 3 theaters at once, making simultaneous blockades of Europe,
we have no
the Middle East, and
we have no
Asia
money for
Pacific
schools.
a real possibility. Another aspect of a global war would involve submarines, which unsurprisingly the US has more of than almost anyone else. Its fleet contains 53 fast attack submarines, 14 nuclear-capable ballistic missile subs, and 4 guided missile subs. Even without using the world-ending nuclear capabilities of an Ohio-class submarine, this massive fleet would allow the US to launch stealth attacks on enemy naval vessels anywhere in the world, completely undetected. While America would be far more hard-pressed to fend off a global coalition on the ground, at sea, the US stands a much better chance of victory. A third global area of battle would be the Americas, where the US would have the greatest ability to marshal forces and project power. And because Mexico, Canada, and other countries in the region are far less powerful, there is a good chance the US could blockade, control, or destroy the majority of their military and economic resources. Canada and Venezuela are both obvious targets because of their status as oil producers, and in a global war, the US would probably aim to shut down or take control of resources in both. Another obvious target is the Panama Canal, which serves as the gateway between...
Pay attention. This is what Trump was talking about. He's crazy. He is crazy, but he says the quiet parts out loud. I saw a research, or it was something that I read that explained why Greenland would be very important for us and our protection. And the Panama Canal, again, the faster you can put equipment where it needs to be, the better. And so this is why Trump has been talking about taking the Panama Canal back. You have to pay attention to the moves that China has been making. And so instead of militarily taking things over, China has been, they've been helping countries rebuild and stuff like that, but it's in a shady way, right? So China has been using their financial moves, I guess is the way to say it, their financial policies to help other people. And then when those people aren't able to pay their loan back to China, then China starts taking things over and possibly like having them vote certain ways with different situations around the world within, the UN and stuff like that. So, and as a matter of fact, I was talking to my dad about Cuba over the holidays, and he said that, even Cuba, it's not run by Cubans. That's run by the Russians and the Chinese. And yeah, we'll talk about that later. But China's been making moves, and they don't have a bunch of people yelling at them and telling them not to do that because that's not fair. They just go and they just do it. This video is a perfect example of why we need a strong military. We also need to leverage some of that money that we have to improve education. That's the very, very next thing. So we don't continue to vote people that don't have the country's best interest in mind. There are people out here that will sell you out for their financial benefit. Always keep that in mind.
Atlantic and Pacific, and where 40% of all US container shipping flows through. The US controlled the canal from 1903 to 1979 and would try to seize it again during a global war. This would also provide a choke point against the militaries of Central and South America. Chile is another potential target as the country supplies 28% of the world's copper, critical for the production of modern electronics. Now, obviously, a hypothetical alliance of every other country in the world would have the numerical advantage in overall troops and economic resources. But keep in mind that as of 2022, US military spending was $877 billion, constituting 40% of the global total and more than the next 10 countries combined. Today, this...
But we can't afford education and we can't afford healthcare. Come on.
enormous sum still only accounts for about 3% of the country's GDP. In a global war, this percentage would almost certainly increase and could rise to similar levels as World War II, when US military spending accounted for over 40% of national GDP. Today, that would mean somewhere close to $10 trillion a year in military spending from the US alone, nearly 5 times the global total from 2022. Astronomical numbers like these mean that a war of attrition against America would also be likely to fail, as the country could outspend the rest of the world several times over for many years. To gain a true strategic edge over the US, a global coalition would have to somehow outgun and outspend the Defense Department, while also maintaining their own smaller economies.
No problem
Another
spending.
crucial domain in a global conflict with the US would play out in cyberspace. This would probably be the first line of contact between the warring parties, as both sides would attempt to gain information superiority and take each other's systems offline. While US Cyber Command would almost certainly be overwhelmed with attacks by many actors at once, America could also use its own highly effective attacks to shut down enemy power grids, computer networks, weapons, electronics, and much more.
This is what they do. Like, this is what they talk about. Even though they misrepresented what Russia did, they were doing like buying ads and stuff like that. They did what it took to convince people that don't do research about some foolishness. That's what I mean when I say we need to invest in education. So people don't buy ads and convince us that this country is shitty. It's not shitty. This is the best country on the planet. They have you convinced that this country is just not. Do we need some cleaning up? Yes. Do we need to get rid of some old politicians and start kicking around some new ideas? Definitely. But don't let these people convince you of all this stuff. And what's crazy is you have a bunch of rich people telling a bunch of poor people that it's terrible. Meanwhile, they're rich as shit. They're not struggling. And then they convince you all this stuff, and they're doing, the Scrooge McDuck in cash. They're not struggling. You are. And you keep voting for this silly stuff.
Not as dominant in cyberspace as in the real world.
But this, yeah, that's what I was going to say. This is what it is. The Russians hacking and hacking into government computers and stuff like that. And then you're letting Elon and those kids go in here and do this stuff too. Like, we don't know what they're doing. We don't know what they're doing. You know how easy it is to plant a virus in these computer systems, especially if they're old. Especially if they're old. The only positive thing about having the system that we have in place is that basically no one can get to it. You have to physically be in the room. And now somebody physically got in the room. We didn't vote for that. I didn't vote for Elon to come in here and do this stuff, collecting everyone's information and stuff like that. I don't know what they took. I don't know what they have. And when you're doing dumb shit like this in darkness and in secrets and stuff like that, like, no way, dude. No way. That should make everyone feel uneasy. I don't know who this man is. I don't know who this man is. I don't want him near my information. I don't want him near your information. I don't want them making decisions that doesn't go through a committee and goes through the process. Yeah, it's about time that we make things a little more efficient. We have all of these computers and apps and all kinds of stuff. We have all this stuff. We can make TikToks and send videos across the planet. But we can't have a government that's not bogged down by dumb shit. Old as shit. We can't figure that out. We're the best country on the planet. Ever. That's what they say. The best country ever. And we can invest in infrastructure and get our computers up to speed. You know what I'm saying?
The US still has by far the most capable and best funded capabilities in the world. In the 2024 fiscal year, US cyber spending will rise to more than $25 billion, and the country continues to top every ranking of national cyber power. However, this domain would also be one of the biggest dangers to the US in a global war, as cyber attacks are notoriously difficult to predict and defend against. A well-placed cyber attack by a less powerful nation.
The easiest thing to do is always be ready for it, because it's always coming. Even if it's not one guy just sitting there with his eyes melting out of his head in a dark room with only a computer screen and he's just like all zombied out. Even if it's just that, he can create a program. Whatever hacking he's doing, he can create. If you're hacking, you're smart enough to then create a program that will do part of the hacking for you. That'll continue to guess passwords. That'll continue to do stuff. It's a never-ending thing. The answer to that is always be fighting it off. Always.
Will be catastrophic and would probably be a more serious immediate threat to US citizens than a kinetic strike on the country. However, again, we have no way of knowing how much American cyber spending would increase in a total war, or how quickly that would lead to new capabilities. All the elements point to a big conclusion. The US is so powerful that it could take on the rest of the world for weeks or months with no certain winner. Because of this, such a hypothetical conflict would likely become a war of attrition in both the physical and digital worlds. The US would work to starve the world's other major powers of oil, war supplies, and other vital resources, while attempting to preserve its own. A true assault on the US mainland would be extremely difficult because of the country's size, geographic positioning, and incredibly well-armed military and civilian population. Because of the US military's global presence, most of the fighting would likely happen elsewhere, opening theaters of war everywhere from the Middle East to South America and East Asia. In the end, the victor would almost certainly be whichever side could outlast the other, both in terms of military and economic resources. While the scenario of America versus the entire world is obviously an absurd one, it does give us a useful picture of just how powerful the US military really is. With resources greater than those of most individual countries and nearly limitless power projection, even a conventional conflict against the US would be very, very hard to achieve true victory. Add in the country's continued dominance in cyberspace, And it's not all clear whether the rest of the world would actually be able to win such a war. And all of the speculation above excludes the most powerful part of the equation: nuclear weapons. Because of the principle of mutually assured destruction, no country really wants to use them today. However, it's worth noting that the US has over 1,400 actively deployed nukes, and in any real global conflict, they could be used to give any non-nuclear country
That's
a very
a lot of
permanent
pew-pew.
end. And even in a very distant hypothetical like the one above, we should remember that the cost of human life in any worldwide conflict would be staggering, and that even
wouldn't be
winners
worth
in
it.
such a war
For
would
what?
suffer. But what do you
Yeah.
think? Would the US really be able to win a war against the rest of the world? Or would the country eventually be overwhelmed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more military content and analysis.
That's scary stuff. That is why you have to be careful. You know, like, I can't say that Trump is not entertaining. I can't say none of that stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean that I need him driving the bus, but here we are. But the point that I'm trying to make is that is why you need to be careful with who's in charge at all levels, because you don't know. Like, you don't know if he's going to wake up one day and just feel feisty and then just start sending nukes. But, you know, we'll see. We'll see. According to this video, it seems like we can, if things get set off, then we can last a couple weeks, and hopefully, you know, it is pretty fun to see how all these doomsday preppers and all these folks, the militant ones that are in society, like they come in handy. If we are going to be talking as much trash to the world as we are these days, we need people strapped up. We need people to understand you're not just going to walk in here. We're a feisty bunch. I would rather all of us be able to communicate in a calm way and try to figure things out so we can de-escalate everything. Because, yeah, like, it's cool to know that we're a force to be reckoned with, but that doesn't mean that we need to go out in here and pick fights and test our resolve. You know, we as a society, we have to be better. We have to move away from the violence of it all and actually switch our brains to being more productive and more of a builder, right? So then that way we can start figuring out what are the resources that need to be had, how do we make them, and we have a whole bunch of people specifically for the United States. If we were to educate all of our people, we would be able to figure out different ways to become energy independent. We don't have to go to a different country that has a better education system than we do. We have a military that we are very proud of, and that is very well funded. And it seems like our greatest export is violence and war machines, instead of actually educating our people to then make society better, making society better, then having people that don't live here see what it is and see what it's like, and having them use us as an example of how they want to live, a free society that you get to do and say and share and become whatever it is that you want. Whatever it is that you want. That's how it's supposed to be. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with each and every one of your friends, and if you want to come hang out with me, watch videos while I work on creative projects, hit that subscribe button. Then change the little bell so it says all. That way, every time I come out with something new, you'll be alerted. Don't forget to go to coconutjustice.com to get you some dope gear, and with that, I'm out.